When I was 18 years old, in February of 1989, I entered the U.S. Army intending to become a combat engineer. And so I wound up going to Fort Leonard Wood, and I left from here in Milwaukee, actually just blocks from where I am shooting this, where they had the MEPS station in the federal building, which is no longer there. It's been moved to other places. So I'm going to tell you the story of my very first day, and maybe a little bit more as well, although probably I'll put off the rest to some other Sadler Stories videos. So the MEPS station was where you would go to get tested for your physicals, for in-processing, and typically it was your recruiter who would take you there. I was living in Waukesha at the time, and that's where my recruiter was, at the recruiting station. I don't remember the name of the guy. I'm sure he was just some sergeant or staff sergeant who was serving. That's one way that you move up in the ranks. You work as a recruiter. It's kind of a job that's not for everybody because you do have to lie to people. And that's what he did to me, of course. Some of the time, other times not lying. For example, they, will tell you, oh, you don't have to get this in writing or that in writing. They'll take care of that when you get to your regular station. If you haven't gotten it in writing, well, you're not getting it. So I wanted to be, a ranger. That wasn't going to happen, as my drill sergeants immediately told me. But long story short, he drives me downtown, and I've already gone through the ASFAB, and I've got these really high test scores. But I want to be a combat engineer because me and my buddies had this crazy dream. I remember this is late 80s, right? And we're here in the Midwest, so kind of an isolated area. We had this dream that we were going to all go into the Army in combat arms of various sorts. One of my friends was going to also be a medic. And then we would get out, and my friend, his uncle had been a mercenary, so he had connections, and that's what we were going to do. And a totally crazy idea. And of course, I lost touch with those guys much later. But I saw, combat engineers, and I was like, wow, they blow things up. That looks really cool. I'll get to do demolition. That'll be a lot of fun. And you also do a lot of infantry stuff. So I don't remember whether I had my physical like the day before or the day of, but I was told, bring minimal stuff, because the day that I'm actually entering the Army, bring minimal stuff because you're going to ship out tonight for your station where you'll do basic training. And in the case of combat engineers, basic training combined with AIT, which is where you learn your craft. So they kind of interpenetrated each other. And basic training in the Army, this is a little bit of a digression. Back then, I have no idea what it's like now. You do a lot of shooting and a lot of marching and some hand-to-hand combat, and you do a lot of cleaning and a lot of physical training, PT, and you spend a lot of time learning about how to do on-the-field medical things and nuclear, biological, and chemical training as well, because we were preparing to fight against the Soviet Union and their allied forces of Warsaw Pact in Europe, most likely, and perhaps in other places in the world as well, perhaps, the Korean Peninsula. But interestingly, I did have it in my paperwork, if I remember right, that I was going to go to Germany, because that's where I wanted to be. So, that's what was going to come, down the line. But first, you actually have to get in. So you go to the MEPS station, and there were a whole bunch of us there. And they had us all lining up in one big cold room. It was winter here in Wisconsin. Things weren't as insulated back then, and it wasn't as warm as it is now due to global warming as it is now back then. So I remember all of us being there, and then we had to take an oath. And that was basically it. And then they said, all right, wait around. We're going to send you to Fort Leonard Wood. We're going to put you all on a bus, and you're going to go out there, and then they'll figure out what to do with you then. And so we waited and waited and waited, and it's getting dark. And then they told us, all right, everybody get downstairs. And we go downstairs, and we're kind of milling around. We're standing out in front of the building, right across from the, they called it a Roach Motel at the time. I think it's the Wisconsin Hotel. I don't know if it's in as bad shape now as it used to be back then. I suspect it's been rehabilitated, but people said it was pretty nasty there, the ones who had to stay overnight. And then a Greyhound bus pulls up, actually a couple of Greyhound buses, and they pile us on. They said, all right, everybody get on, right? And I had no idea how long it would take to get to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, but I knew it was going to be a long trip. So we settle in, and I think if I remember right, they gave us something to eat, but I don't remember what it was. And then we're on the bus. And it's nighttime, and it's dark, and some people are chit-chatting with each other. Where are you from, man? Where are you going to? What are they going to do with you? And of course, everybody at that time was, a smoker or endured smoke, and so we're smoking our cigarettes on the bus. And I think we had some sodas or something like that we could bring along. And I'm sure we must have stopped at a couple places. I was half asleep a lot of the time. I basically smoked up my whole pack, in part because you knew that once you got to basic training, they weren't going to let you smoke. And so smoke them while you got them is, the refrain. And so we're chugging along, and most of the time we're out driving on the interstate, but it's fairly dark because we're going through countryside. I imagine we probably went through Illinois and then into Missouri. Maybe we crossed through part of Iowa. I don't really know the route that we took, but it was a long, long time. And we're going along, and all of us are kind of like winding down, trying to get some sleep if we can, but it's cold, it's uncomfortable. There's guys, all around you, jostling you, and there's always some guys, talking with each other, arguing with each other. One thing I do remember about this trip, though, there was a guy on the bus who spoke French and English. He was a Cajun. I don't know what the hell he was doing up in Milwaukee, but I could barely understand his English, and I could barely understand his French. I had a hard time with both of those, and nobody else could really understand him either. So anyway, we're chugging along and chugging along and chugging along, and we finally, in the middle of the night, get to Fort Leonard Wood. And you can see the sign, right? And the bus pulls up there, and there's some talk between the bus driver and the people at the guard post. And then we roll in, and they're driving around, and we're all looking. Oh, wow. You can see the barracks, and you can see other sorts of things. I wonder where they're taking us. What's going to happen next? So what happened next was really quite eye-opening. Bus pulls up in front of a barracks. There's a couple drill sergeants standing outside in, their jackets, their characteristic hats that you've doubtless seen in movies. And then the bus stops, the door opens, and the yelling starts. Get off this bus, you maggots! Get the hell down here! They start just yelling stuff at us. We're all like, whoa, what the hell's going on? We better do what these people want. You grab your stuff, you run off the bus, and we're all kind of milling around. They're like, get in formation, get in lines! And so we're trying our best to do that, and it is cold as hell. We're standing out there in the snow, and the snow is about this deep. And I'm like, I actually had some, like a jacket and a hat on and gloves and stuff like that, because I'd come in from, Waukesha to Milwaukee. And so I'm like, well, this is really something. And there's more than one bus too, by the way. There's buses that have pulled up from other places, and not everybody's actually getting off of our bus. But we're all out there. And I start looking around and I realize there's some guys out there in shorts because they'd come from warmer places. And it's colder in Missouri in February than it is in Wisconsin. I was like, oh, it's going to be nice going down there. You know, it's going down south. It's going to be nice and warm and toasty. It won't be like where I live. No, it was worse because those winds come down out of Canada across the plains and they blow through those hills and forests of Missouri onto they'll go through Missouri and into Illinois and all of that. And so it was pretty damn cold. So they tell us first, all right, get any sort of contraband you have. And we're like, what's contraband? Anything that you're not allowed. And of course, we don't know what you're allowed or not allowed. And then they start saying knives, alcohol, tobacco, any of those sorts of stuff. And, I'd already smoked up all my cigarettes. I didn't have any alcohol. What I did have, though, that I was a little bit worried about, I had a little bottle of cologne, Royal Copenhagen, that I'd been given at Christmas. Pretty crappy cologne, kind of a cloying smell, but it was quite popular back then to give, shaving kits that would have aftershave and cologne and like a razor and soap and stuff like that. And so that's what I'd gotten that year. And I brought it along. And I was like, do I throw this out or do I keep it? And so I just left it in my bag. But I was worried, what if they search us? What if they go through our stuff? And they didn't. And eventually I threw it out later because what the hell are you going to do with it, right? Who do you have to smell nice for? Just a bunch of other guys who are getting dogged out every single day. So they're yelling. And some, you can look around, you can see like everybody's eyes are bulging out. And some guys are just standing there shivering. And we must have been out there in the cold and the snow for a good 5-10 minutes lined up in these crappy rows that are kind of, they're not real military formation stuff. And they're like, all right, get the hell inside. So they send us all inside. And they're also like, making fun of the guys who have short sleeve shirts on or shorts on who don't have proper clothes. They're like, what did you think was going to happen? And so we get inside. And the next thing that happens is they start figuring out who's who and asking us, what's your name and all that. And they start putting us into groups. You're in this squad or platoon rather of this company. It's all one company. And you're in this one, you're in this one, you're in this one. There are 3 as I remember, and each one had a couple drill sergeants assigned to it. And we had Sergeant Henry, who I'd find out later on, and I'm blanking on his name, but he was a guy who'd been in Korea, and we actually got some of the good sergeants, and Staff Sergeant Cruz was in charge of it. We didn't get Sergeant Hupp, who was kind of a jerk that actually Sergeant Henry called him out on, or some of the other sergeants. And then the very next thing that they did is, all right, stow your gear over there. So we put all our stuff down. And those of you who have warm weather stuff, we've got a job for you. So this is before we get to find a bunk and go to sleep or anything like that. We need to shovel all this snow out of the yard. And so it's the middle of the night, again, probably 2 or 3 in the morning. And we're out there in the middle of the cold, and I'm like, oh man, I'm glad I got my boots and my gloves and my hat and a good warm coat. Some of these poor bastards don't have anything. And they give us a bunch of snow shovels. And here's where I get to see another one of those cultural things. So, of course, growing up here in the Midwest, I shoveled the snow a lot. It's just something that you do all winter long, especially if you're a kid, especially if you're a boy, because it's one of those tasks that falls upon you. And, hopefully you've got a dad who's got, a snowplow or a snowblower, so you don't have to do all of it. But, since my dad died when I was 11, I was the man of the house. I'd have to shovel the driveway, and I'd actually make money going to shovel other people's stuff. So I get out there and I'm just doing the normal sort of shoveling. Some of the people had never seen a snow shovel before. And one of the funniest things that I saw, only funny for a minute. I saw somebody from somewhere in the South take the snow shovel and plant it into the snow as if it was a regular shovel, a spade, and then step on it as if they were digging with it. Well, you can sort of predict what happened. It was a metal snow shovel, and it collapsed and folded up. And now the drill sergeants were pissed because now you're destroying Army property. And frankly, I think it was all kind of a show. They were just looking for anything that they could use as material for chewing us out and, making an example out of somebody. If it wasn't that, it would have been something else. Probably this had happened many times. Whoever that guy was, and I don't remember. I just remember him being skinny and scared and, sort of like withering as they were shouting at him about how he was going to be charged for wrecking Army property that had been placed under his control, And I was like, oh man, I'm glad I'm not that guy, And we're all kind of watching, giving side eye, as you say. And then they sent him inside. So I don't think anything actually happened to him. But we were all like, ooh, these people mean business, And so it was a way of trying to impress things on us. And we got the yard cleared. Those of us who are from, warm climates. Interestingly, on the bus, there were guys from like Upper Michigan. So the bus had clearly like come down to Milwaukee from some other places that were even more snowy and cold. Then we all go into the barracks, and it feels actually kind of nice because the barracks are heated, not well, but sure as hell better than being outside in the wind and cold and snow. And they're like, all right, get in the bunks, and we're like, well, which one? I don't care. You just find a spot and be in it. So we get in the bunks, and I think there were blankets. I don't think there were any sheets or anything. There were, just the mattress and pillows. And by now, we're like frazzled, we're tired. We've been up, half the night. We just did a bout of physical activity. We're all ready to crash. And that's what we did until we get woken up early the next morning on, Army time. And they told us to fall out. We're still in civilian clothes at that time. And the very first thing that they did is form us up into formations outside of the barracks. Again, it's cold, but they'd managed to get, some of the guys who were inappropriately dressed for the cold, some gear, and because they must have been anticipating it. And they marched us off to the mess hall, which was, maybe half a mile from our barracks. And, we go through the line and get ourselves some breakfast. Never enough. They never gave us enough food for the sort of things that we were going through. But it was, nice anyway, some coffee to heat up. And then they took us off. The very next two things that we did that morning, and this is where I'll end the story. I don't want to go on too long with this, was go to the barber, and you paid to get a haircut. And your haircut, you could ask for whatever you wanted, but you were getting the same haircut as everybody else. You were getting it completely shaved off. And it was interesting, when you did that, there were some people who had some really funny looking heads. And there were some people who had massive scar tissue all over their head. There was one guy in particular who was an Alaskan native, and his name was Private Boots. I got to be friends with him over time. He was in my platoon, although not my squad. And when he got his head shaved, there were long scars all over his head. And we're like, wow, man, what happened to you? And he said, oh, my older brothers, they like to hit me with the nunchucks. And we're like, geez, that is hardcore. You're lucky you didn't get brain damage. Or maybe you did, So they shaved our heads. And then the next thing that they did was take us to supply, where we got our gear. We got boots issued to us. We got all of our shirts and undershirts and jacket and a hat and gloves, various kinds of gloves, pants, socks, underwear, all of it, either wool or something like that in camouflage or olive drab green, and all of us got the same issue. Some of it, I lucked out. Everything that I had fit. There were some guys who the stuff didn't fit right, or the boots that they got, unfortunately, private boots, actually got some bad boots. There was a little bit of irony there, and they almost rotted off of his feet. But we got all this stuff, and then the drill sergeants took us back to the barracks, and they're like, "You're cleaning these barracks, right?" The one thing that I'll close on that I do remember, and I don't remember exactly which day this was, whether it was the first day or a little bit later on, was, we were able to get our hands on shoe polish, kiwi shoe polish in little tins. And we're supposed to make our boots look decent, right? Now, I had no idea how you shine boots or anything like that. But there were some people there who knew about that, older guys in our platoon. And I remember one of them giving me a little bit of advice. So you've heard of spit shining probably, right? Spit shining, we think of it as like this way of taking your boots and, you rub the polish in and smooth it out, and maybe you use some spit, and it makes it really nice and shiny, right? Which is what the drill sergeants like, so you look good. I actually thought you used spit. So I'm, putting the polish on and shining it up and spitting on it and stuff like that. And this older guy, and when I say older guy, he was probably, 28, 30 or something like that. Older black guy. He's like, "Oh, son, spit shining don't actually use spit. That's just an expression. Use water for that. Let me show you how to do that." And so he got down and he's like, "Okay, so here's how you can do it." And I said, "Well, why couldn't you spit, right? Spit is basically water." And he says, "Well, you have a tendency, if you do this long enough, to run out of spit." And I was like, "Well, there you go." And that was, I don't remember seeing him afterwards. I think maybe he went to a different unit or something like that. But that was my induction into the U.S. Army. Everything was pandemonium, confusion, and then a lot of waiting around, which was, in a certain respect, a good preparation for the things that would follow.